So the typical relationship has always been that an organization has a job that it needs to fill, right? It has a vacancy, it's trying to do something, and it doesn't have anybody to do it. And so the organization, the leaders, they put up the job posting online, and then employees apply for the job. And the way that it works is that employees basically say, kind of like Liam Neeson in the movie Taken, right? I have a particular set of skills that I can bring to this job. I can do what you need me to do. And so the match is made. Company has the job that it's posting, the employee comes in there, and then they say, I can do this. Perfect. So imagine that right, this match is made, and now all of a sudden you hire somebody, and this employee is showing up to work, and they're being vulnerable all the time. And they're showing up one day and they're saying, hey, I need help with this. I can't really figure it out. Then they show up the next day and they say, oh, you know what? I'm so sorry I made this mistake. I really screwed up. Then they show up the next day and they say, I'm having a really tough day. I'm having a hard time. Then they show up the next day and it goes on and on and on and on and on. Eventually what's going to happen is that your leadership team, the employees who work there are going to look at this employee and say, whoa. I'm confused here. We brought you in so that you can do a particular job. And now all of a sudden you're using vulnerability as a way to justify why you don't have the competence to do that job that you're supposed to be doing. And so vulnerability, right? Obviously Brené Brown pioneered a lot of this work, and she looks at vulnerability as risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. I mean, to simplify that, it's basically this idea of doing or saying something where somebody else can use what you said or did to harm you in an emotional way. Sometimes physically as well, but for most people listening and watching this, it deals with emotional harm. So doing or saying something where somebody else can use that against you to harm you in an emotional way. That's really what vulnerability is. It could be a mistake, a challenge, talking about family, whatever it might be, right? It's that kind of ammunition. And, I really started to wonder, we understand why vulnerability is important in our personal lives, right? It's important to create connection with friends, with family members. It builds trust and creates those powerful relationships. But as I was interviewing these 100 CEOs for the book, it became apparent that inside of organizations, we have a different dynamic. We have hierarchy, we have bosses, we have salaries, we have deadlines, we have customers. It's a very different environment. And so I started to wonder, is vulnerability in our personal lives really the same as it is inside of our organizations? And then taking it one step further, what if you're a leader? You're actually responsible for the lives of other people. You're responsible for the fiscal aspect of a business, the dollars and cents. Is vulnerability for you really the same as it is for everybody else? And the answer became very apparent, and that is no. So let me give you a couple examples of what I'm referring to. Hey, really quick, sorry to interrupt you, but did you know that 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed? Do me a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can get notified when more videos just like this one are released. And now let's get back to the content. So Hollis Harris, he used to be the CEO of Continental Airlines. Struggling airline. We all know that the path of Continental Airlines, eventually acquired by United Airlines. And what happened is in the 90s, the company was going through a really hard time, and Hollis was asked to send out a memo to his entire workforce to kind of address the situation and what was happening. So he sends out a memo to his around 40,000 employees at the time. And he acknowledges that the company is going through a tough time. He acknowledges that the economic environment is uncertain. He talks about how he's not sure what the right path going forward is. And he ends his memo by telling his employees to pray for the future of the company. Okay? The next day he was fired. Now, this story was told to me by Doug Parker, who just retired as the chairman and CEO of American Airlines. And what Doug Parker told me is that what Hollis Harris did was vulnerable, but there was no leadership. Now contrast this to another CEO that I interviewed named Fleetwood Grobler. And Fleetwood is the CEO of a company called Sasol. South African energy company. They have around 30,000 employees. When he became CEO of the company, they were $13 billion in debt, and this was even before the pandemic. Then the pandemic happened. The company completely nosedived. The banks were about to come in and repossess everything. And in that situation, he too was asked to address his entire workforce and talk about what's happening. And he gave a very different message. So he started out the same way that Hollis did. And he said, I acknowledge that we're going through a tough time. I acknowledge that the economic conditions are not in our favor. I acknowledge that I don't know the exact steps that we need to take to get out of this. But then he added the leadership piece, and he said, but I have a vision and an idea of what we can do. I have a picture in my mind of what our business can become. We have an amazing group of employees, and I know that we can rebuild trust in the eyes of our customers. I know that we could rebuild trust in the eyes of our employees. And if you come with me on this journey to reinvent who we are as a business, I'm sure that we will be able to succeed and pull ourselves out of this mess. And that's exactly what they did. The message there was vulnerability plus leadership. And this is, I think, the big mistake that we make. I don't think that if you are in a current or aspiring leadership role, you should just be vulnerable. You should add the leadership piece to it. I call this the vulnerable leader equation. Vulnerability plus leadership equals vulnerable leadership. Competence plus connection. So a very simple and typical example that we see all the time. Somebody assigns a project to you and you make a mistake. Being vulnerable means you show up to work and you say, oh, you know what? I'm so sorry, John. I screwed this up. I made a mistake. That's vulnerable, right? Okay. Leading with vulnerability is taking that exact same scenario and saying, I'm sorry, John. I really made a mistake on this project, but here's what I learned. Here's what I'm going to do going forward to make sure that I don't make this mistake again. So the concept of leading with vulnerability doesn't mean that vulnerability is bad. It means that you should always try to demonstrate what you're doing to learn, to grow, to become more competent, to get better along with vulnerability. And we surveyed 14,000 employees. And it's funny because one of the questions that we asked them is, what is keeping you from being vulnerable at work? And the number one response was, I don't want to be perceived as being weak or incompetent. Therefore, I'm never going to be vulnerable. And the reason why that is such a fear is because we're only vulnerable. We forget that whenever we're being vulnerable when possible to try to demonstrate what we learned, how we're growing, what we're trying to do better. And let me give you just one more typical example that we see. Let's say you're a first-time leader, right? You've been at the company for a while. You just got promoted. You're leading a team for the first time. And you want to talk to your team, right? What do we see happen so often? First-time leaders will go in front of their team and they'll say, hey, my name's Jacob. I'm a first-time leader. I've never done this before, but I'm super excited to be leading this team. And I'm sure we're going to figure things out and have a great relationship, right? Go team. That's very vulnerable. But if you give that kind of a message, your employees are going to take a step back and they're going to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait a minute. You're going to be leading us? You just told us that you don't know what you're doing. Instead, take that same scenario and lead with vulnerability. Add the competence piece, the leadership piece. And so now what you could say is, hey, my name's Jacob. I'm a first-time leader here. I'm so excited to be leading this team. I know I haven't done this kind of work before. So here's what I'm going to do. I've hired an executive coach who's going to guide me. I have one of the top leaders inside of this organization who's going to be mentoring me and guiding me so that I can be the best leader that I can be. I'm also taking a couple courses, and here's some books that I'm going to be reading. And I'm going to have this policy where if you have constructive feedback that you want to give me to help me become a better leader, my door is always going to be open to you. Now, all of a sudden, you take a step back and you say, okay, right, now this person's trying to get better. Like they're trying to close the gap. They're trying to learn and grow and become competent. And that is a very different message to have. So you have to remember that especially if you aren't in a leadership role, you always have to bring together these two components when you can: vulnerability and leadership, connection and competence.